Welcome to today's professional development session. And before we actually get started into this session, I would like to introduce myself. I'm Judy Summers, and our host for today's session is Daniel. And so if you are watching online and would like to speak up, please raise your hand or let him know through the chat room that you would like to speak up. We are not doing any kind of an outside interactive piece. I'm just inviting whoever's with us to speak up if you would like. And if you're watching it through one of our videos, I will invite you to just pause when I ask a question and jot down your thoughts about what that question is. So let me go to, and our topic for today is educational policy. So that takes us to the first question. What does that term mean to you? Policy. For most of us, it's something that we typically don't give a whole lot of thought to. But occasionally it might be something that would come to our attention. Generally speaking, particularly when we're building a course, policy is, or are some of the things that would make sure we want to include in the syllabus and in the course Start Here page for what institution policies students need to know, for what departmental policies might need to be followed, and possibly even course policies. So essentially, from that perspective, policy would refer to guidelines that are set down from some, let's say, outside body. So then my question is, what policies do you think might affect you as an instructor, as an educator within the system? What kind of policies do you think would affect you? Occasionally we hear about things in the news or things within the university system that could indicate policies. So we're going to talk today about how some policies might affect us and what that means for us. So then my next question is, what do you do to learn more? If you hear something about a policy that you think might impact you as an educator or your course or your teaching, how do you learn more about it? What steps do you take? Where do you start to research? And for me, the research on this comes from a different source than one that I normally go to for our various topics. And as we think about those policies, we want to think about the impact of those policies within the institution. Many of them are state policies. How do they impact our institution? How do they impact the department? And how do they impact us as educators in our instruction? So the first place I go for something having to do with policy is an organization called EDUCAUSE, and I'm going to show you the link to that in just a moment. But when I went to EDUCAUSE and looked up policy and law and their EDUCAUSE library, I was amazed at what actually came up. Take a look at this. This is a word web that I created from the list, just the list of various topics that came up when I did that research. Believe it or not, 38 different topics came up when I did that research. So let me just go over to the EDUCAUSE page and show you that list, although I kind of prefer it this way, but let me show you that list. I went under EDUCAUSE, as I said. I went to their library and then their topics, and then clicked on policy and law. So take a look at the various policy and law items that came up through EDUCAUSE. And each one of these is a link to, in most cases, several articles or items within their system that come up. So while it may be some of these things are items that we've discussed before, things that we certainly focus on within the Center for eLearning, and things that we may not have thought about as policy. So, but we definitely have heard of many of these. Acceptable use is something that we used to use a great deal in the IT area. Copyright, certainly. Data policy, data privacy are things that we may not have actually given a lot of thought to. Intellectual property, we have thought about. The FERPA, and that's something we'll talk about in just in a moment, but the FERPA policies are some things that I found very interesting when I decided to search that, because that was the first thing that came to my mind in thinking about policies that could impact us as instructors, as educators. But this Higher Education Opportunity Act is another one that definitely impacts us, although I would not have pulled that out of my head as one that was important. But security policies, privacy policies, web accessibility, many of these things we've talked about in other professional development sessions, and many of them, all of them, are things that are, there's a great deal of information about. The next item that I felt was an important piece of it had to do with a document from the American Association of State Colleges and Universities. And while I had heard of this, I wasn't completely familiar with it. So I pulled up a basic explanation of it. This is an organization of state-supported colleges and universities that offer degree programs. And it serves more than 420 public colleges and universities, systems of higher education throughout the U.S. And one of the things that I felt was an extremely important aspect of it is that the AASCU, American Association of State Colleges and Universities, works to extend higher education to all citizens, including those who have been typically underrepresented on college campuses. So essentially they serve as stewards of education for public education, because as a part of a public university, we certainly have an obligation to the public. And they work for the public good through education and engagement and improving the lives of the people within the community. And so the topic, the article that I got from them, now let me get to that. This is a document that I got from them. I'm not going to read you the whole thing, but I am going to show you the basic things on it. The American Association of State Colleges and Universities each year puts out a listing of higher education state policy issues that they think will be coming up for state colleges and universities within the coming year. And in this case, they've done the top 10 on those. So I'm going to go back to our, and this is the listing of the top 10 items that they mentioned. So I'm going to take us through them and share each one of them, discuss a little bit with you about what they referring to. Their top item on their list was higher education funding within state budget concerns. And this whole document, it gives policy issues that they feel like state lawmakers will be considering. So the higher education funding, the concern is that more states will rely on budget cuts rather than tax increases to balance the state budgets. Higher education funding is one of the items that they have flexibility with in their budgeting. So the assumption from the association is that that's one of the things that will be affected. The idea of affordability, which is our second one here, stems from a growing concern about the cost of education and student debt. And in past years, state lawmakers have tried to have tied funding for higher education to commitments from the university governing bodies to freeze tuition rates or cap tuition increases in order to make education more affordable for the community. Now, clearly, this has serious consequences then for the question of education quality. The need to keep colleges both affordable and maintain high quality is going to be something that budget issues and all of these things, as we talk about them, are items that I'm sure that as you think back over the past year, you will have heard mentioned somewhere or another in the news. The third item is the economic and workforce development. State legislators are definitely interested in making sure that there is a skilled workforce available to step into the jobs that are available. Nearly all of the jobs that were created during the economic recovery went to workers with some post-secondary education or training. And the majority of the jobs that were lost during the recession were those that required a high school education or less. So trying to balance out the issue of high-paying jobs, affordable education and training, and skilled pathways for the state workforce to get into the jobs is definitely on policymakers' agendas. All of these, again, as I said, are things that we have heard some about. The fourth item is a concern over undocumented and the DACA students. Policies that have been directed at undocumented immigrants have been and clearly are one of the most closely tracked issues this year. And so some things that really take on a high impact along those lines. And let me see if I can make this a little more visible for you. In September, the president of the university, Dr. Kelly, puts out a blog every week, and in September, his blog was addressed at the concerns about the undocumented, what they referred to, and his statement indicated that they would do everything within their power to preserve the educational opportunities for these students. Florida is one of 3 states with a pretty significant number of undocumented and DACA students, and these 3 states have signaled that they will introduce legislation to deny in-state tuition to these populations. Now, when you think about the tuition costs and what the out-of-state tuition is, that's a pretty scary thought. The fifth item was the emphasis on campus sexual assault. Over the last several years, administrative personnel have used has promoted legislation to help give information about how to counteract the campus sexual assault. However, the current administration has given no indication that they are interested in devoting as much interest to that. So the lack of visibility on the issue is highly likely to affect the amount of attention it receives. And so the extent to which the momentum of the last few years will continue is certainly unclear. The next item on this list of potential concerns for 2017 is the issue of guns on campus. And clearly we've seen over the past year legislation actually started in 2016 allowing individuals to carry concealed weapons on campuses. And so this clearly it will be one of the highest educational policy issues. The overwhelming majority of those who are stakeholders within campus, including the law enforcement communities, do not support allowing guns on campus in any capacity. So this is going to be a policy issue that will certainly bear watching. The next one is the idea of institutional productivity and student success. And one of the key items under this is the funding of performance-based funding, PBF, performance-based funding, and the idea that funding is linked to outcomes. We've seen a certain amount of that around here, and so the debate over the effectiveness and the unintended consequences will certainly continue to grow. The next item that they list is the idea of academic freedom, civil rights, and social issues. And higher education has been accused of having some biases in these areas, but there have been some indications from legislators for pulling funding from things which the educators don't feel are worth supporting. Now, typically, funding threats made by lawmakers don't generally materialize. However, they do indicate that there's a divide between education leaders and the legislators. The ninth one that they list as a potential concern is student debt management, that there's the constituents within the states have a perspective of using debt as a mechanism for financing post-secondary education. And so one of the items that has been brought to lawmakers has to do with improving financial literacy among student borrowers, because many students don't have an idea of what it actually means when they sign for the student debt. And then the 10th item, which is something that's interesting, is the idea of dual enrollment. And several states have passed bills to make dual enrollment opportunities more accessible through financial incentives, transfer pathways, ways of making that in order to get students through and out a little bit earlier. So that's the primary items. Let me get this out of the way here. Those are some of the primary items. And another one that I don't have on here was the idea of the FERPA. And I didn't realize until I started researching this that the FERPA laws and guidelines aren't quite as restrictive as most of us think, or at least certainly not as restrictive as I thought. The FERPA requires that we keep student grades private, and we keep access to personal information, but it isn't as restrictive as we had thought. And you could witness that by the fact that many courses have their students participate in online social networks, social networks. And so as we take a look at those ideas, I would like for you to think about what is our intent as we think about educational policy. Is it for our own personal knowledge, which is something that we all need to be a little bit more aware of? Does it have to do with how we interact with our institution? But the more important piece of it is what is our responsibility to our learners, and how do we best address what our learners' needs are in terms of guidelines for them, for what policy is governing what happens within our classrooms, and how they respond to that. So I'm going to give anybody who wishes to an opportunity to make any comments. And that said, then I'm going to thank you for joining us today in a conversation about educational policy. I will be putting together a list of resources, references for this, including the documents and the websites that I have shared with you, and the ideas about how policies definitely impact our instruction and our students, which is really what is most important to us. My primary concern is always how my students are responding in the class and what's impacting them. So, and most of us don't think about how those policies are impacting. So thank you for joining in this session today. If you're joining online, please feel free to reach out and send an email if you're joining online or watching it as a video. Please feel free to reach out via email with any questions or any ideas that you wish to share about it. Thank you so much.